Now it was long ago when it all began, back in Bethlehem, in the promised land. A single star appeared in the sky, and three kings saw, and the east as wide, east as wide. And they checked the books full of prophecy, and the one king said, why, it's plain to me, you see it means that a king is born, who will save mankind on this blessed morn. Blessed morn. So they packed some gold, myrrh and frankincense on some old camels with some fancy tents, closed down the house, set the servants free, and three kings rode into history.
There is an ornament lost inside the night, there on a Christmas tree with 1,000 lights. No one can see her, she's standing all alone. Somewhere she glistens where no one can see. Can say what had happened. All of those words that we put into play no longer matter. I should have known that then. I just know you're far away. On this Christmas day, on this Christmas day, on this Christmas, somewhere the wind caused moments in the snow. And if he sees her, he never lets it show. He just drifts behind her, erasing every step. Tinsel and garland, whispers retreat. I don't believe I can say what had happened. All of those words that we put into play no in an old city bar that's never too far from the places that gather the dreams that have been. In the safety of night, with its own neon light, it beckons to strangers, and they always come in. And the snow, it was falling, the neon was calling, the music was low, and the night, Christmas Eve. And here was the danger, even with strangers inside of this night, it's easier to believe. Then the door opened wide, and a child came inside. There's no one in the bar that's been there before. And he asked, didn't we know that outside in the snow that someone was lost, standing outside our door? And the bartender gazed through the smoke and the haze, through the window and ice, that corner street light. We're standing alone by a broken pavement. Was a girl, the child said, could no longer get home. And the snow, it was falling, neon was calling. Bartender turned and said, not that I care, but how would you know this? The child said, I've noticed if one could be home, they'd be already there. Then the bartender came out behind the bar, and if all of his life was never that far, and he did something else that he thought no one saw. When he took all the cash from the register drawer, and he followed the child to the girl across the street, and we watched from the bar as they started to speak. Then he called for a cab, then he said, JFK. Put the girl in the cab, and the cab drove away. And we saw in his hand that the cash was all gone from the light that she had wished upon. If you want to arrange it, this world you can change it. If we could somehow make this Christmas thing last by helping a neighbor, even a stranger, to know who needs help. You need only just ask. Then he looked for the child, but the child wasn't there. Just the wind and the snow waltzing dreams through the air. So he walked back inside, somehow different, I think. For the rest of the night, no one paid for a drink. And the cynics will say that some neighborhood kid wandered in on some bums in the world where they hid, but they weren't there, so they couldn't see by an old neon star on that night, Christmas Eve, when the snow it was falling, the neon was calling. In case you should wonder, in case you should care, why we on our own never went home on that night of all nights. We were already there.
Hello? Hello? There we go. Can everybody hear me all right? How about in the back? Everybody good? Great, great. I think I'll just hold this. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody. Obviously, the weather played a pretty big part on how we all got here, and I see a lot of guys from a lot of different areas. I see Birch Nagard, Ivan Teagan, guys that traveled thousands of miles to get here, and I know it means so much to the family, both families, that you're here, and we're here to celebrate a great guy's life. As you heard, or I think before the big bomb of my microphone, there was a small bomb that's supposed to be like the Pendleton Roundup bomb that starts at 1:15 every year. And Ronnie Currin always said, one of his quotes were, the national holiday, which is called the Pendleton Roundup. It was one of his favorite, well, it wasn't one of them, it was his favorite rodeo, there's no question about it. So at 1:15, the bomb went off, just like it does every year when they start the great Pendleton Roundup, and I think it's time we get started with Ron. I was trying to make the finals one year, and back then, the season went longer. Now it ends the end of September, and back then it went for the whole month of October, clear into November, or the 1st of November. So we did a lot of crazy traveling if you were trying to make the top 15, and I was, about mid-October, I was sitting in the middle of Bonifay, Florida, and I was down there all by myself. And I was kind of pouting around because all my friends were home hunting deer and doing fun stuff, and I was down in Bonifay, Florida, trying to eke into the top 15 to make a trip to the National Finals Rodeo. And so I was sitting on the fence thinking I didn't know a soul anywhere in Florida, and I hear this voice come up behind me and goes, "Hi, neighbor," and it was Ronnie Currin. And he happened to be in the same position I was. We were both trying to make the top 15. We were both 16th, 17th, somewhere in that time zone. And so we sat there on the fence and we had a great visit. It was good to see him, and we laughed. We said, well, we had to come 3,000 miles from Butter Creek to run into each other, and it was really good to see him. Neither one of us made the finals that year, but at least, you know, the big deal was we tried. We gave it our absolute all, and that was one thing that Ronnie Currin always did. He never, ever backed up. It was full-blown, all forward. We got to get this done. We gave it our all. Ronnie always said that your failures can lead to success. That was kind of one of his mottos. And you know, I got to agree with him. He lived his whole life with that never, never, never give up attitude. From a little boy till right at the end, that was Ronnie Currin. And you know, that was 40 years ago. Maybe a little more than 40 years ago when we were sitting in Bonifay, Florida. And I'm sure at that time, the last thing I ever thought I would be doing is standing before all of you today talking about the life of Ron Currin. But we never know what life's going to bring. It's just what it is. It doesn't make sense. And I know in the case of Raina and Riley, you know, Ronnie could have been up here standing talking about my life just as easy. And maybe, you know, at that point it would have been better for their sake. But you know, God's the one that deals the cards, and our job is to play them. So with that, we're going to tell a lot of stories. We're going to celebrate a great man's life, and it was a very full life for 61 years. But at this point, I'd like to bring up Marty Campbell.
Well, thank you, Butch. Norm McLean, who wrote The River Runs Through It, for his father, fishing was a metaphor, and they fly fished on streams all over Montana. But I'd say from the outside looking in, the Currin family, their metaphor for life was leaving the left-hand box on a fast-running horse toward a Coriani steer, and that might be a little bit more accurate metaphor for their lives. Perhaps in the roping calves, it might even be in haying there on Butter Creek. But for Ron Currin Jr., it may have been in taking a young cattle buyer under his wing to show him the ins and outs of the industry. The metaphor may have very well been telling those bulldoggers at Pendleton whether they better be kicking or wooing after hollering, "He's out," halfway. In their own way, all those things in the world around Ron Currin probably held a sturdy metaphor for life. I grew up looking up to Ron and his brothers. I wonder how many head of cattle I loaded for the Currin boys while working under those bleachers over there in the Roundup grounds. We cheered those guys on because they were locals. And I was just as proud for Ron when he knelt there on that grass with that bucking horse trophy that we saw on the screen there just a moment ago, as everybody else was from around here. And as I grew up, I got to know those Currins, and every one of them was different. But I remember Ron as a leader. I remember his sense of humor, and I love all the quotes in the little bookmark in the folder there, because that's what I remember about him. And I am sure that all those little metaphors, from bulldogging to cowboying to cattle buying, even to judging rodeos, shaped Ron Currin's life in many ways. They seem to be a lens through which he viewed the world. Just like the rest of us, Ron's life might not have been perfect. There were bumps in the road and challenges along the way, but we all saw him take those highs and lows the same way he would have had he been hitting the grass over here in this big arena instead of winning the round. He got back up, and he kept swinging. I loved reading Jake Stanley's tribute to Ron here a while back. Jake learned the cattle buying trade from Ron, and he said he was his mentor, his boss, his partner, but most importantly, his friend. However, the most important thing that he took from his relationship with RC was his attitude. He was going to win no matter what. When you look at life through those cowboy lenses, it shapes everything. Everyone here was touched by the life Ron lived. Now, he didn't live it perfectly just like the rest of us, but he did live it to win. And I think even more importantly, he lived it to help others win. His friends, his family, heck, even kids he barely knew. People talk about those bulldoggers and how they're always cheering each other on all the time, how it's a team effort. But I saw Ron Currin doing that years before it was ever noticed. He gave time to kids. He gave his humor to everyone around him. He lifted others up, and even when he was beat down with cancer, that winning attitude and sense of humor came out. Maybe bulldogging is a pretty good metaphor for life. It's a little bit different than team roping. When you're missing the team roping, it doesn't hurt. When you're missing the bulldogging, you may be digging dirt out of the back of your brain for a week. Even when it goes well, you may end up hurting. And that's a bit like life. It hurts even when it's going well. It's good even when it feels like you're getting punched in the chin every jump. It's amazing when you risk getting a pile driver in order to end up making a great run. Even in the sweetest of times, life may still hurt, and that's okay. Jesus will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And what's even more amazing is that He is God, the one who designs us and gives us those lenses through which we see and live life. And like Ron Currin, we can live that life to touch others. And God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit not only will never leave us nor forsake us, but He's come to give us life to the full. And I think that's the life we saw lived by Ron Currin. And God gives us lives that may be filled with bulldogging runs, might be filled with hay fields, mountains, the Pendleton Roundup, but regardless of where those lives are lived, they're gifts from Him. In spite of the misses, the down markets, the kicking calves, and everything else, Jesus is right there. All we have to do is know the get out, listen to that caller, follow Him, and He'll be right there hazing us through the battle. In the little bookmark here, 2 Timothy talks to us here, chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. For I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also all who have longed for his appearing. Ron Currin Jr. was all cowboy. That's the life that God hammered him out to live, and it touched every one of us.
Thank you, Marty. So Ronnie's life. As I said in my welcome, we don't know what life's going to bring us, and probably that's the right thing. But we do have the ability to live our lives the way we want to live our lives. And Ronnie packed a lot of living into his life. He was born to Ron and Judy Currin in 1960. And if you know the bloodlines of Ron and Judy Currin, he's half Irishman and half Polak. And if you've ever been around that cross, because I know one, I work with one every day that's half Irishman and half Polak. You don't want to sort cattle with them. You don't want to cross them. It's a very interesting cross. And Ronnie was never a kid even when he was a kid. He was always so serious and so grown up. His grandpa, George Currin, his great uncles, Huey, Ralph, and Bob, they were all on their ranch. His uncle Tom, and of course his dad Ron, they were full partners at that time on the ranch. Those are the kids he played with. They were all men that were very colorful. They all had different personalities. It was a lot of fun to run into every one of them when you were on the creek. And Ronnie learned everything from these men about ranching and farming and life in general, really. He also had quite a mother, Judy, that he absolutely adored. And she was about as handy as three men put together if you ever were around Judy. She could go get a lot of jobs done in a hurry. And his grandma Helen, I think she was just an angel that was sent down to take care of the rest of them, because she was absolutely the best. I've never heard one cross word about Helen Currin. So 2 years after Ronnie was born, along came Tony. And then 2 years after Tony was born, along came Mike. And then 2 years after Mike was born, along came Steve. And then finally, a long way down that road, little Jennifer showed up. And I know Judy was pretty darn tickled that she could finally put a dress on one of her children. Ronnie always called her Sis. Ron Sr. told me one time, he said, we never did a lot. We never had a lot of money to go do a lot. But one year we made a big trip. We loaded all the kids into the station wagon. We hooked our small camp trailer on behind it. And we all headed up into Canada to the Calgary Stampede. And I can't even imagine how wild that trip must have been for the Currin family. I think there was one story when they got to the border, they were asking for weapons and stuff, and I think Mike might have had a pocket knife that he pulled out and thought he should turn it over to the Mounties because he was sneaking across the border with a weapon. But the Currin boys, they loved everything cowboy. Ronnie and his friend Clay West, when they were early in high school, they started out trying to ride bulls. Of course, that was pretty short-lived, but Uncle Huey, and if you knew Uncle Huey, you'd really appreciate this, but he said, Ronnie, nobody's ever broke one to ride yet. Why do you ride bulls? So then, Ronnie and Clay both figured out that probably wasn't their future, and they both turned into the timed events. And Grandpa George came to Ronnie and said, Ronnie, you're never going to be big enough to be a bulldogger. But Ronnie, he worked all three of the timed events. He was a good bulldogger. He was a really good calf roper, but he liked the guys that bulldogged. He liked hanging around those guys that bulldogged better than the calf ropers. So he concentrated more on the bulldogging than he did the calf roping. RC never, ever gave up on anything. His attitude was just that way. He just, when he got a vision and when he got focused, that's the direction he went, full bore. So in high school, he started out, he team roped with Clay West a little bit. Since they were both ex-bull riders, they had to pick another event. But when Ron was a senior and Tony was a freshman, Tony told me the other night, said they entered the high school rodeo in the team roping. Ronnie, I think, was the heeler, Tony was the header, and it was 1 month away. Ronnie said, boys, we need an arena. They didn't have an arena at that time. So, Tony said, in about 2 days, they built an entire arena. And it was quite an arena. They put it right behind the house. And according to Tony, it went up pretty fast. He said, we weren't even really sure if it had a back fence yet, and they were already roping in it. And Ron Sr. came along and said, boys, if you're gonna rope, then you're gonna need horses. He said, go over to the pasture, pick you a couple horses out. So they did. Tony went over and picked a horse he called Friday. Ronnie went over and picked his Palomino horse, I believe, called Cindy. They were just a couple of ranch horses. They were 4 years old. And now they were just a few weeks away from the high school rodeo. So they went back to the arena. They just got on their horses and figured this must be how you do it. And they did it. They went to the high school rodeo. They won 4th in the team roping. And the Currin name in the rodeo world was started. And boy, it was a name. Mike Currin made a sign in wood shop that hung over the arena gate. They named the arena the Butter Creek Frontier Days Incorporated. In fact, I think the sign still is up there around the house somewhere. And the arena is just up from our place. Since I married the cousins, we were always neighbors, and you can still see remnants of that arena. I still see it to this day when I go up to turn the well on. There's boards, a few poles, some woven wire, some barbed wire, some hog panels, maybe a pallet or two. It wasn't the fanciest pipe arena, but they didn't need it. It served its purpose. They also had a good neighbor that lived right over the hill by the name of Sid Britt. And anybody that knows the Northwest knows that Sid helped more guys become winners probably than anybody in the area. So they'd ride their horse. They didn't have a way to haul their horses, so they'd get their horses and they'd ride over the hill. It was a couple miles. Go down to Sid's, bulldog all evening. They'd get back on their horses in the dark. They'd ride back over the hill and put them up for the night. So all the Kern boys, they went on to be great cowboys, great rodeo cowboys. Tony told me one time about he and Ronnie had a partnership on a bulldogging horse called Wally, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And Grandpa George, they had him tied up to the trailer right there. They were getting ready to go somewhere, and here came Grandpa George. And you had to know George Kern to appreciate this, but you had to line him up with a fence post when he drove up and down the creek to see if he was really moving. He just took his time going each direction. George slowly came down the creek, turned into their driveway and drove down. Asked Tony, what was that? Tony said, well, it's our bulldogging horse. We just bought him. George said, how much did you pay for that horse, Tony? Tony said, well, we paid $10,000, Grandpa. George just shook his head and said, you'll never pay for him. And he slowly drove back out of the creek and went back up to the main ranch. And heck, I think they paid for that horse in about 2 months. Ronnie went on to college, making the college finals 3 times. He was the NRA calf roping champion at 20 years old, and then on to the PRCA. When you look at his rodeo accomplishments, there were a lot. You look down through there, in 1985, he was a member of the winning team at the Calgary Stampede. At that time, they had team rodeo a few years up there. And Sid Britt, I think, was the team captain, and he took the Northwest team up there from the NRA. And Ronnie was part of that team, and they won that. He won Ellensburg in 1990 as far as the calf roping at the 5-header up there. And if you know Ellensburg, that 5-head calf roping they had was famous. To win that, you were pretty darn handy. He joined the PRCA in 1983, and in his rookie year, he won the all-around at Salinas. He set the arena record, the Caldwell Night Rodeo, in the steer wrestle, and I think that record still is in place today. I think Casey McMillan tied it in 2007, but he still holds that record. In 1993, he was the Pendleton All-Around Champion. In 1995, he was the Pendleton Steer Wrestling Champion. And Tony was telling me about that year, and Tony's going to come up and talk. I hope I'm not stealing all your stories, Tony, but he said that Tony had and Kelly had a really good mare called Somebody that they just won everything on. And Tony said they had, I think, 7 guys on her at the Pendleton Roundup. Everybody wanted to ride her, and there were 7 of them that rode her. Well, when it all came down around to the short go, there were 7 guys that rode Somebody that made the short go. Tony was going in second. I think Ronnie was going in first, and down the line. So Ronnie got with Tony and said, Tony, we got to do something. You've got to do something, probably. He said, we can't have all these guys riding this mare in the short go. That's too many runs. So I think maybe Brad Goodrich he had to go get on something else, and a few other guys. But as it turned out, so it goes down through the short go. Tony has a good steer, makes his run. He's winning it with 1 guy left, and that's Ronnie. And I was pretty impressed when Tony told me this. He said, I was winning it, and he said, it was Ronnie's turn, and he won the all-around at Pendleton, but he'd never won a single event. And he really wanted him to win the steer wrestling. He said, I was just praying that he could win the steer wrestling. And sure enough, Ronnie came off the hill and just smoked one and won that title that year. So that was pretty impressive. He qualified for the Columbia River Circuit Finals 10 times. He was a Columbia River Circuit steer wrestling champion. He was a 2-time event championship invitee, which means you go there and you work every timed event. Just an invite is amazing. He received the 30 years of service as a Pendleton Roundup volunteer gold card. And of course, and the rest of the Currin family are in the Pendleton Hall of Fame, which they should be. He won the calf roping one year at Reno, 1988, I believe, and it was a pretty funny story. I'm going to steal this one from you too, Tone. They get to Reno. He gets out of the rig. He doesn't have a horse. He doesn't have a rope. He doesn't have a piggin string. Gerald Camarillo is standing right over there with his horse and everything. Ronnie went over and said, Gerald, I don't have a horse. I don't have a rope. I don't have a piggin string. Gerald says, I got them all. Get on. Ronnie went out and won the calf roping. At Ellensburg, he won the calf roping there, I think the same year. And like I said, he was probably a better calf roper than a steer wrestler. He just liked the guys he hung around with in the steer wrestling better. And on 2 occasions, he was 16th or 17th in the world standings. Never made the NFR, but was one of those guys that certainly could have made it 4 or 5 times just as easy. He was just a talent. And it wasn't because he was more athletic in fact, he was probably less athletic than a lot of guys. But his attitude was he did not lose, or did not believe he could lose. Ronnie was a true winner at everything he did in life. There's no question about it. He went on to college, of course, made the college finals 3 times, like I said. And he was the leader. He was the leader of that crew. Ronnie was the general, and then everybody else just got in the rig and went wherever Ronnie went. Tony said one time they were getting in the rig there at home, headed to Canada or California or somewhere. One of them asked, Ronnie, where are we going this weekend? Ronnie said, just shut up and get in. You'll know when we get there. That's just what he did. And through all his rodeoing, though, Ronnie never lost sight of his love for ranching and the cattle business. I remember we'd make trips we didn't travel together. I'm not claiming we did, but we'd catch rides now and then. We'd be in Canada, and either Ronnie would be coming home or I'd be coming home, and we'd jump in with each other because we lived a mile apart to begin with. So we jumped in. I remember one trip we were coming from Canada, and we were driving home, and we were talking about hedging cattle and the stock market, and all the commodities. And he was, Ronnie was so interested in all of that. And I thought I was too. I think I was. Ronnie went on, and we talked, and Ronnie went on and actually made his living. He learned it, learned all there was about it, And me today, I'm still as confused as I was in the back seat of that Oldsmobile 40 years ago when we were talking about it. But he was a really smart guy. He went on and made his living trading cattle, and I'm just amazed at how successful he became at that. I'm not surprised, but I'm amazed. But he learned from the bottom up. He spent time in Chicago learning the commodities markets. He went to New York, Wall Street, sat on the stock exchange, tried to learn all that. And typical of Ronnie Currin, he took his never give up attitude and he just learned that business. Started from the bottom up. He worked with guys like Bob Hodneyfield, Rod Anderson, Terry Dirks, the Peaks and Western Video Marketing, Fred Hershey, and of course he finally became the director of procurement for John Wilson and Beef Northwest, and John's going to speak shortly too, so I'm sure he's got a lot to say about Ronnie Currin, but he just never backed up. He met the love of his life, Rayanne Engel, and they married in 2005. In 2007, they decided to start a family. Now remember, Ronnie Currin is probably in his mid-40s. So all his friends were kind of making fun of him, going, what are you thinking? It's going to take you 3 or 4 years to have a couple kids, and by then, what are you doing? Typical of Ronnie Currin, his never give up attitude. Rayanne gets pregnant, they have twins, they have 1 boy, they have 1 girl, done. 9 months, they got a whole family. In 2019, Ronnie got the news about his bladder cancer. And in typical Ronnie Currin fashion, he said, not to worry, I'll whip this. And he never lost that drive until the very end. But I'm sure Ronnie knew that this could be a deal changer. He was a realist as well as a very positive attitude guy. And he went into overdrive to try to teach Rayanne and Riley and Raina everything he could about life and how to succeed, possibly without him there someday. The same with Jake Stanley and trading cattle. I believe he did the same thing for Jake. He always tried to be a winner, and he always tried to have the upper hand. Ronnie always liked that. Well, last night I met with Steve at Max here and Colby and Riley. And I haven't been around Riley Currin that much. But after sitting there with Riley and visiting with him last night, Ronnie did a heck of a job. That apple did not fall too far from the tree. He was so proud of both Raina and Riley, and, you know, he did set a great foundation. They spent time in the later part of it hunting on the Currin Ranch on Butter Creek. They'd go wakeboarding at the Willamette River with Jennifer. And he loved going to Montana, spending time in the Big Hole with Fred Hershey and his family. That was one of Ronnie's favorites. And of course, they loved rodeoing with the kids. Ronnie lived a full life. Ronnie was a great guy. There's no question about that. And his I got this attitude lived with him right to the end and always put Ronnie Currin right at the top of his game. So with that, I'm going to invite several people up here to speak on behalf of Ronnie as well. We'll start with Scott English. He and Ronnie went 1,000,000 miles rodeoing together, and they were great partners. So Scott, come on up.
Rodeoing with the Currin boys. It didn't get any better. I was about 7 years old the first time I met Ronnie, that I could really remember it. But we had known each other before that because our parents were friends, good friends. I showed up out on Butter Creek with my dad to do a horse trade with Ron Currin Sr. The boys were training for the Olympics. They had high jump set up and long jump set up and about everything you could think of set up. I decided I was kind of Olympic material myself, so I thought, I belong right here. You know, this is the spot for me. And so we trained for a while. Pretty quick, Ronnie, he goes in the garage, and he pulls out a Honda 70 motorcycle. I'd never been on a motorcycle ever, and this was just one of the many firsts with Ronnie Currin. We head down Butter Creek there. Ronnie's got this thing wide open, went through every gear just as fast as he could go, puts both hands behind his back and turns around and looks me right in the eyes. He had my attention. That was exactly a metaphor for how we rodeoed. Fearless, absolutely fearless. I remember one time complaining about the steer that I had drawn. Ronnie told me, he says, Scott, well, he called me Colonel. And most of you guys that know me know that to the Currin boys, I've been Colonel for 50 years. That's a nickname my dad gave me long ago. He says, Colonel, why don't you blow the barrier back and hit him right behind the horns right there and see what happens. And I was ashamed that I had been complaining because I knew Ronnie wasn't going to put up with it. No feeble effort, ever. He wouldn't tolerate a feeble effort if you're rodeoing with him. And I hit him behind the horns and up-ended him and won the bulldogging. And he could put that in all of us. Every time we had nodded, Ronnie was right there. He had the pig pull, putting the pig in the corner, and he had you believing that you were going to get the money. He was our leader. He took me to my first pro rodeo when I was on a permit, Cooley City, Washington. He did so many things to teach us not only about life, but how to enter, how to travel, how to be a good friend. Most importantly, how to be a good man. I look back on some of the stories, and I guess probably my favorite one was the fact that Ronnie always seemed to have us in a tight spot. He loved having just a little bit of mischief in him all the time. We decided we got to go to Medicine Hat, Alberta, and get the money up there if we thought we could. And Ronnie doesn't have enough horse papers for all the horses that he thinks we need to take across the border. But that's all right. We'll load the ones that they don't have papers for up front, and you know they won't count them. It'll all be good. I'm riding in the back in the camper. We roll through the border up there north of Sandpoint, Idaho. Next thing I know, a guy's shining a flashlight in the camper telling me to get out. I get out, and they send me upstairs by myself. I'm locked in a little room. It ain't half as big as this stage, sitting there on a chair in my underwear because he wouldn't let me put no clothes on. Well, the rest of the boys got interrogated, and they tore the camper apart. And I'm just thinking, Ronnie, why did you try and get them horses through here without all them horse papers? Well, it turned out that they were looking for somebody that had committed a crime, and I fit the physical description. I thought it might have something to do with that unpaid ticket for 120 miles an hour in Alberta, but apparently that wasn't the case. But anyway, it was always something like that. Everything was a contest. We played cards everywhere we went. It was always for a tank of gas, always for dinner. If we chartered an airplane, we were going to split the expenses, and whoever won the most threw everything that he had in there to pay for that airplane. And unfortunately, Tony seemed to be the one that paid most of the time. But I got to tell you, rodeo's short. You know, rodeo teaches you a lot. It teaches you a lot about how to stand on your feet and be your own man. But there's a lot of life after rodeo when you're not running steers for a living anymore. And I think Ronnie and I probably became better friends after rodeo than we were before. I started a hay company in 1995. I called Ronnie and I said, just want to let you know I bought a hay truck, and I'm going to try and, talk to some of the ranchers that we know and whatnot and sell some hay. Okay, Colonel, bring me a load. Just like that. First load of hay I ever hauled. Ronnie Currin bought it. That's a friend. I started into the cattle business in 2006, built a little feedlot. I needed somebody to buy my cattle. Called Ronnie, I said, I need an order buyer. He said, for what? I said, I'm going to feed some cattle. He says, I'll take care of that order, Scott. And he did. I mean, and the cattle were just like I knew they'd be. Perfect. Best ones he could find. That kind of a guy is irreplaceable. He meant everything to me. He didn't have an ounce of quit. Ever. Even with cancer. I'd call him up, how are you doing, Ronnie? No worries, Scott, I got it whipped. Got it whipped. I'm going to miss him. And I'm sure enough anxious to see him in heaven. We're going to put $1 on the fence post and we're going to match one more time. Maybe this time I'll beat him. But I kind of doubt it.
Thank you, Scotty. Before I bring someone else up, Mike Beers was supposed to be here today too, and he was going to tell a story too about Ron Currin, and he never, he couldn't make it. He ended up with COVID, I think, or something, and so he called me, and we talked last night. He had a couple pretty good stories. The first one was he was coming to the ranch, our ranch, because he was dating Mary's sister at the time, and the Currin boys wanted him to come up there and help them at their arena. So he said, I went up to the arena. He said, and this is the Butter Creek Butter Creek River Stampede Incorporated Arena. He said, I got up there, Butch, and he said, I looked at the arena, he said, my God. He said, there were like 4 old mother cows at the bottom end, and they were running calves down through there, and he said, it wasn't even plowed up, it was just grass. And he said, Jesus, boys. He said, Ronnie, you've got to plow this up. You can't be practicing on the grass. And Ronnie said, Hepner's got a grass arena. Pendleton's got a grass arena. Why can't we practice on the grass? So Mike said, we practiced on the grass. He also told a story about he had a white calf horse that the boys were using, and they got in a trailer wreck with it and killed a couple of horses, and it happened to be one of the white horse. And Mike said, you know, it just was one of those things. It was just fate. He said, I didn't expect to get paid for anything for the horse, and, you know, it was just something that happened. He said it didn't hurt our friendship or anything else. Ronnie and I were friends for a long time after that. And he said, Mike, he said, I was at the circuit finals one year, and he said, I had a sorry year. He said, I'm not kidding you, Butch. He said, I was so broke. And he said, I had a sorry circuit finals. He said, I was going to go to Arizona. He said, I didn't even have enough money to get gas to put in my pickup to get out of town. And he said, Ronnie Currin walked up to me and gave me a check for $4,500 and said, this has bothered me for a long time, and I think I owe you this. And it was years later after that. And that's just the way Ronnie was. He just made things right. And Mike said he couldn't have given him a bigger compliment and more money. It meant so much to him that he was really a true friend. He said he's going to miss him terribly. One other story was that Tony said that I didn't mention was when they'd go rodeo and they had a pickup and a Capri camper. Everybody had Capri campers back then and a bumper pull trailer. No one had living quarters or anything. And he said they would have to sleep head to toe in the Capri camper so they could get more guys in there to help share expenses and go to the rodeos. So they'd load them like livestock. At this time, if Brooke Hershey could come up and speak about Ronnie and his Montana connection.
My dad, Fred Hershey, wrote this, and I told him I would read it for him, so hopefully I can hold it together. I first met Ronnie when he was going to school at MSU in Bozeman. The rodeo coach called and was putting on an alumni rodeo. They would have alumni compete against the current team. Rodeo is like that. You'd get to meet people at events and become lifelong friends. That's what happened with Ronnie and I. We met once, and it stuck. In the fall of the late 80s, Ivan Teagan and his bulldog and crew that were trying to make the finals were up staying at one of our hunting cabins. We were vaccinating cows, and here comes Mary, Ivan's wife. She had Ronnie in the truck with her, and she was all in a dither. Fred, you have to do something. The guys found a case of dynamite and are tying it to trees and blowing them up. Ronnie didn't like that, I guess, and asked if I had an extra pair of chinks so he could stay and help us work cattle instead. Every year after that, he would show up a couple of times a year to come visit. It didn't matter what we were doing, working cattle, hunting, haying. He immediately took charge. Riley doesn't fall far from the tree with that. He likes to take charge when we're doing stuff, and Raina, she follows orders to a T. One time, Ronnie called when he was working logging and said, "I don't think this job is for me." I saw him a few weeks later at Lewiston at the rodeo judging, and he said, "I think I'm going to try my hand at trading cattle." That fall, he called and asked if he could put a load of cattle to ship to me. It was a long ordeal and took him 2 weeks to put that first truckload together, but we got them to Montana. A year later, he was still buying cattle, and he called and asked if I wanted to buy any bred heifers. I asked him when I would get them, and in typical Ronnie fashion, he said, "Well, tomorrow." So I said sure, and we made it work. It was just one of those deals that stuck. We got to talking at least once or twice a week. Even after he met Ray Ann, he'd call and ask me questions about it, like I would know the answer. I just let him roll and said, "You'll figure it out." He was always interested in learning about our ranch and family, and took a liking to our girls and treated them like they were his own. Visiting Ronnie at Pendleton was always a yearly highlight for our girls. Ronnie could have been partying at the Letter Buck Room with his friends, but instead, every day after slack, he'd gather our girls up and take them to the Indian village to get fry bread, and then to the Happy Canyon show. He was one of their heroes growing up. When Ronnie and Ray Ann had their kids, he was really inquisitive and about how to raise kids, and would call me with all sorts of questions. My advice to him was, keep them with you when they are young, and they will always come back to you. He took that to heart. He loved bringing the kids up to the big hole to spend time with us and our girls. One time, Ronnie was visiting. I had to take my dad to town for a funeral. On the way home, my dad said, "If you have a funeral for me, don't make me out better dead than I was alive." I was telling Ronnie about it, and we laughed and laughed. "Don't worry, Ronnie. We don't have to make you out to be any better, because we all know you're as good as they get." Ronnie's great attitude towards life is something we will all remember him for, and he carried that attitude till the very end. One of the things Ronnie would always say at the end of our conversations was, "Carry on." Before he hung up during our last conversation, he told me those famous words, "Carry on."
Thank you, Brooke. One other story I heard about Ronnie was, actually Wade Nichols posted it today. Wade's not here today, but the Nichols boys, they were good friends with the Currin boys, and they rodeoed at the same time. He said they were at a junior rodeo somewhere, and they were all there, some restaurant having breakfast. And of course, you got to remember George Currin telling Ronnie that you'll never be big enough to be a bulldogger. Well, he said they were having breakfast, and they just had a big old plate of ham and eggs and potatoes and everything else. And the waitress came along, and she said, "Is there anything else I could get you boys?" Ronnie said, "Yeah, you could bring me another one of those plates of the same thing I just had," and he ate 2 of them. He had a big appetite for a small guy. So at this time, I'd like to bring John Wilson up.
I did know having one of my kids read this was an option. I was a little worried about getting through it. If I'd known that, I might not be here. We got stuck on top of Cabbage. I've been about 2 hours getting here. We finally turned around and went the wrong way for 3 miles on the freeway. Got on the Meacham exit up, or the Poverty Flats exit up on top, and followed a road grader all the way down here. But the streaming worked. One of the guys had the cell phone, so we got to watch Butch, and it was kind of cool. So I'm speaking today on behalf of myself, obviously, but also on behalf of the Wilson family and a lot of past and present employees of Beef Northwest and Wilson Cattle. A lot of these stories go deep with a lot of those folks. Unfortunately, at least a dozen of them are stuck up on top. We've been texting all the way, and I hope some of them get rolled in. We told them what we did, and I think others started turning around and going the wrong way on the freeway. So hopefully they're going to make it. But I am speaking on behalf of everybody. They worked with Ron. They knew Ron, spent a lot of time with him for a long time. One thing I wanted to do, just quickly, I think there's probably a ton of people that I don't know about that were a lot of help over the last couple of years. But 3 people that I just wanted to acknowledge were Jeff and Wendy Sparrock. I know they're here somewhere because I've been texting with Jeff. Hi, guys. They were great help all the way through this. I visited with Jeff a lot, and you guys were incredible. And then also from on the business side, Jake Stanley. I'm sure Jake's here too. Jake covered a lot of ground over the last 2 years. That wasn't always easy. So we've heard a lot of rodeo stories. I'm going to talk about the last 20 years. I'm going to talk about RC, the businessman, the cattle buyer, procurement director, risk manager, general counsel for cattle for Beef Northwest. Back in the early 2000s, Terry Dirks was, and I'm sure Terry's here today too, Terry was running procurement for Beef Northwest, and he called me up and he said, I want to slow down. He said, we got to find a replacement for me. So our team put together a recruitment process, and they started wading through all the usual suspects, trying to find somebody. And usual suspects in the cattle buying world is very definitive of what we were looking at. There were a lot of suspicious people. But finally, sometime in the late fall, they came to me and they said, hey, we're recommending that we hire Ron Currin. And I'm not sure when I first met Ronnie, probably 35 years ago, but we didn't know each other that well. We both came from multi-generational Eastern Oregon ranching families that were still in business. We had some things in common that way, but we'd never really known each other that well. Got to know him a little bit better when he went to work for Western Video Markets. But Ron was a team roper. I was a finance guy. He won all kinds of championships, which we've heard about. He was the all-round champion for the Pendleton Roundup. I think the closest I ever got to the roping chutes was the Letter Buck Room. There were, back then I just didn't think that he and I had a lot in common. The other thing that really threw me about Ron, before I knew him very well, was what I call his phraseology. I noticed on the brochure that there were a few Currinisms that were printed out. I've got a lot more of them. But it always threw me. I never knew whether his very unique way of describing situations and the one-liners, I couldn't figure out whether that was the real guy or whether he was putting off something just to kind of throw people a little bit. And a little bit more on this phraseology in a minute. So we ended up bringing Ron on board. And I have to say, it was without a doubt the best hire that I've ever made in my life. Part of the reason was because Ron was an excellent cattle buyer. I know I recognize a lot of faces in this room that did a lot of business with him over the years, that we've done business with. He was a phenomenal cattle buyer. He understood markets, he understood cattle, he knew logistics, he got along great with the operations guys, and that's not always the way it goes between cattle buyers and the guys that run the feedlots. But Ron was incredible in the way he communicated with everybody. He and I didn't, oh, and then the main reason that it was such a great hire was that he became one of my very closest friends in the cattle business. He was my go-to guy when I needed to know anything about the West Coast cattle industry. I am not real involved day to day in the procurement or the risk management, so he and I tried to make a point of talking to each other every Saturday morning when we were both going to be around. And sometimes the conversations would last 10 minutes, sometimes they'd last an hour and a half. I'd call him up and I would say, what's going on in the real world? And he would proceed to tell me. And we'd BS, we'd talk markets, people, cattle, gossip, football, Giants baseball, and just about everything else that we could talk about. And even though it's only been a few weeks, I can't believe how much I miss those Saturday conversations. I have a feeling I'm going to be catching myself reaching for my cell phone on a Saturday morning for a long time. Our team loved him, and I wish more of them were here. I hope they get off that damn mountain. Our team loved him because he was honest, he knew cattle, he shot straight, he was extremely well organized, and he was quick with a compliment, but one of his greatest attributes, he never blamed anybody else for any mistakes. And as most everybody in this room knows, we deal with a perishable product. They're on trucks half the time, and it's always in a volatile market. There's a ton of mistakes. And Ron made mistakes. I mean, we all make a lot of mistakes, but I never heard him try to pawn a mistake off on anybody else. And the team just loved him for that. To put that into context, in his and my career together, I kind of tried to figure it up, and I figured that was over 2 million head of cattle, maybe 30,000 loads of cattle, and probably 15,000 separate transactions. And all of that, we never in our office got a single call from a disgruntled rancher or seller that was all pissed off about getting screwed over or the way the deal went. It's remarkable to me when I think back on that there was never anybody that called up and was really mad at us. Raina and Riley, you know, I will tell you two that you can be very proud of your father as a businessman, because he was one of the most straight up, honest talking, good guys in the industry. You've heard a lot of stories here today, but on the business side, that's a hard thing to do. And you can take that with you forever, because he was phenomenal. I mean, just incredible. A couple things that I wanted to mention. When Ron got sick, that just kind of blew me away. One was his total optimism. I'm sure behind closed doors there were probably a couple minutes when he may have gotten pessimistic, but to the outside world, to me, he was always optimistic. It was always proving the doctors wrong. Don't listen to those people. It's going to be fine after this next treatment. I got one more treatment to go, and then I'm going to be back in the corral sorting cattle. He was always optimistic about everything. The other thing that, from a business standpoint, that we really admired him is he lined us up with the best people out there to take care of things when he was sick. When he first got sick and went through the first set of treatments, he called Tom Hennessy. I don't know whether Tom's here or not today. I suspect he may not have gotten over the mountain. But he called Tom Hennessy up and asked him if he would step in for a while. And Tom said, yeah. And I called Tom, and Tom has a business of his own. He has a lot of things going on. I said, are you sure you want to do this? And Tom said, Ron asked me to do it, I'm going to do it. And Tom did an absolutely phenomenal job. Then Ron stepped back in. He was feeling better. He stepped back in. And when he got down again and knew he couldn't do the job, he ended up bringing Brock Huff in, who's still with us. I know Brock is stuck up on the mountain and will be here pretty soon. But he brought Brock Huff in, and Ron told me, he said, the worst thing about being sick is that I've been hiding these guys from you, and now you're going to know just how mediocre I really am. Which was not true, but it was his way. For a cattle buyer, he was egoless. I mean, I've never seen anybody that could put their ego away like Ron was able to. So back to the phraseology. Emily Folkstad, our CFO, who is also stuck up on the mountain, that I hope will be able to make it for at least part of this. In 2005, Ron said something to her, and really struck her funny. And then a little while later, he said something else. And she said, we got to start writing these things down. This is too good. And so the girls in the office, on our database, the Beef Northwest database, there's a little, whatever they call it, cell called Currinisms. And they started, you know, somebody would have a phone call and they'd call up and say, got another Currinism, and they'd write it down, or in our risk management meetings, our weekly risk management meetings, sometimes we'd take 2 or 3 out of them. I mean, he just put people on the floor with some of the things he said. And I've got a couple of my favorites here that I have to share with everybody. He used to call me the man in the corner office. And one time we were down in California on a pasture deal, and it went sideways, and it was kind of a wreck. And that probably surprises everybody that there could actually be a wreck on pasture in California. But there was. And the guy that we were dealing with didn't deal very straight with us, and he didn't take his share of responsibility, and the deal ended up bad. We moved our cattle out, and there were kind of some hard feelings. And about 2 months later, he called Ronnie up, and he said, hey, he said, I didn't handle that right. He said, I really feel bad about it, and I recognize I didn't do it right. He said, what do I do to do business with you guys again? What do I have to do? He said, I want to continue to do business. And Ron, in typical Ron fashion, he goes, well, mister, I'll tell you what you're going to do. He said, you're going to go to your closet, and you're going to rummage through it, and you're going to find that briefcase that you haven't used for a while. You're going to put it on your desk, and you're going to pack it full of some common sense. And then you're going to go up to North Powder, Oregon, and you're going to walk down to the corner office, and you're going to put your briefcase down on John Wilson's desk. You're going to open it up and show him that you got some common sense, and maybe we'll do business. And it happened. The guy came up, and we talked, and we're still doing business today. And the phrase, pack your briefcase full of common sense, is still used a lot around our offices. He had expressions for bull markets, bear markets, cattle buyers, everything. I walked into a risk management meeting one time, and I said, it was a crazy bull market. Feeder cattle prices were way higher than we wanted them to be in. I said, Ron, what's going on out there? And he said, well, we've seen things improve from sheer insanity to commonplace lunacy. Another time I asked him about the feeder cattle, I said, what are they costing us? And he says, mister, they cost so much, when they tip over, it's going to cost us an entire house payment. One of my favorites, I don't know how many people will get this, is a movie that maybe not everybody's watched, but we were in a risk management meeting, and we'd all decided we need to load up on some cattle. The market was going to go up, and we need to get some cattle around us. And we were all unified that it was time to go. And we always had our risk management meetings on a Wednesday. And so Ron said, he said, I'm going to wait till Monday morning, and then we can start off on this thing like a bunch of white people. And I said, maybe we should be hybrids and get started early. And he sort of puffed up and he said, mister, you can call me Django Unchained. And he started buying cattle. When markets got sour, his favorite expression was, "I'm headed to the fishing pole store, and I'll see you guys in about a month." He used that a lot. Another time he told us, he said, "You can sell me a vial of AIDS-infected blood easier than you can sell me cattle right now." We're writing all these things down for years. I mean, we've got 4 pages of these. It's classic. He liked to pick on cattle buyers. He told the girls in the office one time, he said, "Cattle buyers are like a bunch of cattle dogs. They've been chained up all summer, and you unhook the chain around Labor Day, and something is going to get all effed up." And they usually did. I asked him one time about a cattle buyer in California. I said, "Why don't we ever use him?" And I said, "What kind of cattle does he buy?" And Ron said, "Well," he said, "you could classify his cattle he buys as somewhere between piss and poor." Yeah. And then one of my favorites, we had this young guy that wanted to be a cattle buyer, and he was shipping cattle, and he was helping Ron out. He was kind of an assistant. Ron was sending him out to a ranch to ship some cattle, and he was walking out of the conference room, and he goes, "By the way," he said, "don't wear a cowboy hat. They will instantly know that you are a total dumbass." A lot of cowboy hats in this room, too. And then I could go on forever. I got one more that I thought was hysterical. We had a bad deal up in Washington in a grow yard one year, and we brought all the cattle back, and they hadn't done anything. And I said, "Ron, what happened?" And he said, "The cattle didn't gain. It was a Jenny Craig feedlot." I don't know where they came from. I know he hadn't practiced that. Rayanne, thank you for letting me be part of this today. Like I said, I could go on and on. I love Ron Currin, and I know that a lot of people in this room, probably everybody in this room, love the guy too. And I guess just a serious moment, I would just ask everybody when they go to bed tonight, ask God to love him up there too, because God just got a hell of a team member up there. Thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Tony Currin.
Kind of hoping you'd skip me, Butch, actually. I just have, I'm one of the 4 brothers. I'm second in line. Got a little short story about Ronnie. I've told it a time or two. Most people here have probably heard it, but Ronnie was always our leader. And really not because he was the oldest. He really had everything all thought out. He had it figured. He was our rodeo secretary. He had it all planned out. So anyway, us Currin boys were wanting to go to the national finals. And our strategy was, we didn't know if we had enough skill, but we thought we could out-rodeo everybody. We're going to get to more of them. So Ronnie had this figured out on this one occasion. We were entered at Cheyenne, but the day before we were up in Canada. And no problem, we're going to work Medicine Hat. We got a good Ford pickup. We're going to drive it all night, and we'll be just perfect to roll into Cheyenne to bulldog and rope calves. So anyway, things are going good. We got across the line and getting through Montana good and get down into Wyoming, and gosh dang, that pickup's not running very good. Top speed's about 50, and usually we drove at about 80. And pretty quick, it's going about 40, and man, something's wrong. And dang, we're calculating the time. Oh, this is going to be tight now getting into Cheyenne. And gosh, we get down to about Casper, Wyoming, and it dies finally. And we were right at that first exit there, and that's where the airport is. So Ronnie says, okay, boys, unload the horses. We got 4 of them. Lead them off over the bank. There's some brush there. Time to that barbed wire fence, and we're going to hitchhike to the airport. So, works good. Gosh, this first guy rolled in there, picked us up, and we go to the airport. And Casper's a pretty small airport there. And anyway, there's a lineup of small planes there. And clear down at the end, there was a guy down there. He had his airplane all opened up and looked like he was checking it out. And boy, Ronnie, he run right down there. And boy, in a little bit, he had the deal on. Got this guy hired. He's going to fly us on to Cheyenne. And golly, it's coming. It's 11 o'clock, and Cheyenne's starting pretty quick. And so anyway, we fly down there, and I remember we're flying around the arena there, and they're riding bareback horses, and we're in the next event. So anyway, the airport's right there by the rodeo grounds there at Cheyenne, and anyway, we land, and Ronnie says, okay, mister, he says, boy, if we will not be very long. He said, could you wait here for us? He says, yeah, I'll wait right here. So we get over there, and gosh, they had the calves right in the chute. We were just perfect. So anyway, we all got mounted on whatever we could, and anyway, Ronnie has a really good day. He wins the go-around in the calf roping that day, and you know, at Cheyenne, that's something. There was 350 guys entered in that event. In the steer wrestling, he drew an extra. Which means the steer just walks out. Ronnie catches him right in front, and he places deep in the steer wrestling that day. And anyway, he says, boys, we need to get back to that airport and make sure our man's waiting for us. So we get over there, our guy's right there. He flies us back up to Casper. We get off. Gosh, I was awful worried about those horses. They'd been there a few hours tied to that barbed wire fence, you know. Gosh, we get down there, and gosh, horses are standing there in the shade, and everything's great. And anyway, that was just typical Ronnie Currin there. He would never give up until it was just over. And anyway, Ronnie won 8,500 or something that day, and that was just one of the times it worked out. But anyway, Ronnie was always so positive with us brothers, but also everybody else that was with him, and that stuff rubs off on you, and pretty quick it just makes life really easy. And I'm sure he instilled that in Riley and Raina. And anyway, that's about all I have to add.
Thank you, Tone. So we're going to watch a video of Ronnie here in a minute, but there's one thing I need to read before we do, because Ronnie, typical Ron Currin, he was going to actually try to make a video at the end and take part of this, but he did write some notes down of things that were important to him, and by golly, we need to listen to him. So he had a special request in his will. He wanted us to rent the Pendleton Roundup VIP room for a catered celebration, which obviously that wasn't going to fit all these people in there. And if it wasn't for the weather, I'm not sure if this would have fit all the people either. So they improvised, and of course we're here today, but it's all about the Roundup and the Letterbuck room. Of course, we're going to go to the Letterbuck room after we eat and carry on. But here's some notes that Ronnie wrote for the video that we're about to see, and really for about his life, so bear with me. It starts out, where to start? To cover a lifetime. I'm doing this for my kids, partly for my family, but mainly for a lifetime of relationships. So he just kind of goes through his whole life pretty quickly. No high school athletics, he said. Lived too far out. No one was going to drive him to town. But he is the only one in his class that got an athletic scholarship. Rodeo. College rodeoed in Pendleton, made the college finals 3 times, went to Montana State, And of course, he made friends for a lifetime, like we all do, and like so many people in this room are. We're all kind of joined at the hip. He amateur rodeoed. He won the NRA calf roping, like I mentioned, at 20 years old. He said, Mother and Father and I went to the Dalles to get my saddle. It was a good saddle, but I wore it out completely cowboying. Big-time amateur guys that he looked up to: Troy Perkins, Pat Miner, Rob Black. He said, I want to shout out to Perk. He taught me how to win and act like a winner. Then when my brothers got out of college, we all went together. And my best partner in all things was Scott English. We got winning pretty good. 4 or 5 of us entered in at least 3 events. Inevitably, we joined the PRCA in 1983. And he wrote his card number down, C18033Y. He won Salinas my rookie year. They gave a beautiful saddle. I sent it home to my mother and threw it on the pile. And when he said a pile, they really do. They mean a pile. Those Currin boys had more saddles stacked up in that house. He said, I rodeoed for 12 years. Won a little, lost a lot, but nearly every friend I have came from the sport of rodeo. My greatest thrill was winning the Pendleton Roundup, then once more 3 years later. He said, I wouldn't trade it for $1 million. So then he talks about his life, ranching. He said, my dad always had big country to run cattle and several different ranches scattered around. We were cowboys. We learned how to bale hay, harvest wheat, lots to mechanic on with wore-out equipment, but we learned how to complete a job. He said, one year my dad got hurt one fall in a horse wreck up in the mountains, maybe 1985 or so. So it brought myself, my brother Tony, my brother Mike together as brothers. He said Steve was in college up in Bozeman at the time. He said now with no cow boss, it was up to us to get the cattle home that fall. He said my mother was as good a cowboy as any man, but she stayed home that fall to take care of her husband. The 3 of us got the job done. Trading cattle. And I should have John up here to explain some of this, but this is what he thought of trading cattle. Wake up every morning and check the board at 7 a.m. Every trader has a leak. And then he had mine with a question mark, and that was kind of, I wasn't. Cattle traders are opportunistic, as opposed to cattle buyers who are deliberate. My best day of the year, shipping day. Cattle trucks, buyers with Cadillac cars, tension in the air. So how do I make this day every day? Shasta Livestock, V&G, Beef Northwest, independent trader. He said my first big cattle venture was with Ron Anderson at V2 Cattle. Grain was high, cattle were cheap. I remember trying out a big 5-weight heifer costing in the low 80s. We got them big, sold them in the high 80s. He said the cattle made more money, my end, than the winner of the average won that year at the National Finals Rodeo. He said I was hooked. He said Shasta Livestock, Andy Peak, I'm guessing probably is who he refers to as Andy, $50,000. He said I couldn't believe it. After a couple years, it was commission. That's when things got good, he said. And then he talks about family members. Of course, his dad, Ron, Helen Currin, Hill Street Blues with Grandma Helen every Thursday at 10. Said, I have to say a few words about my grandmother, Helen Currin. Never was a better woman created. She held our family together for 60 years. She was a very quiet woman, but her word was intently listened to. He said, everyone misses her. Uncle Tom Currin. My Uncle Tom was a jewel and a great uncle. We couldn't wait on Christmas Eve for Tom to pull in. He brought the good stuff. He would bring you a new gun, or I remember a pinball machine that we wore out in our basement. But Tom taught us how to run a combine, plow a field, rebuild a motor and a pickup. He had a world of patience with a kid. Judy Currin, his mother. What a job she had in front of her, raising 4 boys, roughhouse boys, and a girl. It is almost impossible to fry enough potatoes and beefsteak every day. She kept us in good horses. Our friends, the Simpsons over in Pendleton, were the major source of them. Think about this. Sunday morning at daylight, catch and saddle 5 horses, put them in the stock truck, get the kids dressed for St. Patrick's Catholic Church at 11, then change clothes, go to the Wrangler play day at 1, stock truck full of kids, horses, with a casserole on the floorboard for the potluck. Not many mothers today could pull that off. Soccer practice would be a day off for Judy Currin. Then one day he went big time and went to the Mustangers over in Pendleton. Other memories noted. Living on the river in the apartment he rented from Isla Lorenzen, playing cards at the Elks Club, Gene Baker, Jim Harvey, McLaughlin the bartender. Note from Ron. Ron had started working on this bucket list for a long time. He said one of his things he wanted to do was he and Spanky, Ken Housenback, flew down to Las Vegas and played cards and stayed at the Bellagio. He said they had a great trip. One thing I do want to say, and this was one note he wrote, because, I did speak about, Ronnie, even with his great attitude, and he was so optimistic, I'm sure he knew he was still on borrowed time. But he had written this note to the kids and Rayanne on May 12, 2021. In case something happens to me, I love you all very much and miss you already. I wish all of you the very best in life. You are the 3 smart, educated, personable. You will go very long ways in life. And remember, Dad loves you. LHS, or YLH, your loving husband. YLF, your loving father. Ron always signed his cards YLH and YLF. With that, if we'll turn to the big screens, we'll show the video.
Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated, all tied up, no more love, and I'd hate to see you waiting. Had to have high hopes for a living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a time, but I always had a vision, always had high hopes. Had to have high hopes for a living, didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be that one in a million. Always had high hopes. Mama said, something for oddities, stranger crusades. Ain't ever wannabes, winning the novelties. Don't ever change, we wanted everything, wanted everything. Stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Oh, stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated, all tied up, no more love, and I'd hate to see you waiting. They say it's all been done, but they haven't seen the best of me. So I got one more run, and it's gonna be a sight to see. Had to have high hopes for a living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision, always had high hopes. Had to have high hopes for a living, didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be that one in a million. Always had high hopes. Had to have high hopes for a living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a time, but I always had a vision, always had high hopes. Had to have high hopes for a living, didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be that one in a million. Always had high hopes.
The heart is a balloon, shoots up through the stony ground. There's no room, no space to rent in this town. You're out of luck, and the reason that you had to care, the traffic is stuck, and you're not moving anywhere. You thought you'd found a friend to take you out of this place, someone you can lend a hand in return for grace. It's a beautiful day. Sky falls, you feel like it's a beautiful day. So let it get away on the road. But you got no destination in the mind. In the maze of her imagination, your love is down. Even if that doesn't ring true, you've been all over, and it's been all over you. It's a beautiful day. So let it get away. It's a beautiful day.
It's my job to let the bullugger know, almost from the cadence of my voice, how fast his steer's coming up through there, whether he's smoking up through there or just loping. Give him a chance to what to expect when he crests the hill. Because he's coming from behind you, you can't see him. Turn him out! There it comes. Halfway. Go! All the way!
Let me hold you in my arms forevermore. You have gone and made me such a fool. I'm so lost in your love.
we belong together. Won't you believe in my song? If I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me? Well, I must be traveling on now. 'Cause there's too many places I've got to see. If I stay here with you, girl, things just couldn't be the same. 'Cause I'm as free as a bird now, and the
This is for you, Daddy. Took my hand, took it down. I climbed a mountain and I turned around, and I saw my reflection in the snow-covered hills till the landslide brought me down. Oh, mirror in the sky, what is love? Can the child within my heart rise above? Can I sail through the changing ocean tides? Can I handle the seasons of my life? I don't know. Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I built my life around you. But time makes you bolder, children get older, and I'm getting older too. So
thank you all for coming today. As you can see, I've pre-recorded this, trying to keep my emotions in check. I just want to give a huge thank you to our family and our friends who helped orchestrate all of this and put this wonderful celebration together for Ron. Today would have been our 16th wedding anniversary, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate Ron than with all of you here. I'm blessed to have had 18 short years with him. He was an amazing man, and he allowed me to become part of his family. He was strong, he was confident, maybe a little headstrong, but he was tough on the outside and tender on the inside. He had a heart of gold. He sure knew how to work hard and provide for his family, and for that we are forever grateful. Ron's battle with cancer started in January of 2019. In all the years, he never once complained, not even to me, even with all the pain. He had an amazing outlook and a positive attitude. He always had it whipped, as he told everyone that he could. He was such a fighter. For many years, he told the kids that he was made of steel, and you can't hurt steel. Well, I guess he wasn't that far off. The journey he took to fight his cancer, we took together. But we couldn't have done it without our village, our family, and our friends who helped us along the way. From emotional support to help with numerous trips to UCSF, to taking the kids to practice for rodeo practice, or taking them to a roping or a branding. Everyone pitched in, and I'm grateful for that, as he was. Special thank you to their pseudo moms, Wendy Sparrick, Mama Murph. Thank you for coming and taking them to those rodeos when we couldn't. My cousin Shar, thank you. Thank you for being here from the beginning with the twins when they were born and we needed your help, and you stayed with us all the way through the end with Ron. Thank you. I can't thank everyone for their support and their help in getting our kids to practices and rodeos and keeping them going. It means the world to me. It meant the world to Ron. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Ron was always proud of his family and his friends that he had all over the country. I'm grateful that we get to continue those friendships. He left us all with a lot of great memories and some fun stories, but the best gift of all was our beautiful children, who had 14 years of love, growth, and learning from the best dad there was. He was very giving of himself and his time and his advice. He was a patient man. Ron told me early on in his diagnosis that he could die tomorrow. He had lived a full life. He had accomplished everything he wanted to, and he felt that he reached the pinnacle of his career, being the cattle buyer for Beef Northwest and Wilson family. But he wasn't going to give up because he wanted to be here for his kids. He wasn't done teaching them, as he said. He wasn't done showing them. So my only request today is for each of you to help him keep teaching his kids, keep his memory alive, share the stories, the rewrite stories, the fun times, the big trades, whatever it may be. Keep him alive by talking to us about him. We look forward to learning more about what Ron meant to each of you tonight as we move on to the Letterbuck room. Ron really wanted a celebration, and that's what tonight will be, to celebrate his wonderful life, a life well lived and well loved. Thank you.
I knew the stakes were high right from the start. When she dealt the cards, I bet my heart. Now I just found a game that I can't play, and this is where the cowboy rides away, and my heart is sinking
I don't think there's any more words left to say. Marty, if you'll come up, we'll give a closing prayer. Dinner is going to be served. Of course, all of us work our way through the dinner line, and then later we'll go to the Letterbuck room and we'll bring in the new year. But thank you all for being here, and it's a great honor to get to do this. Thank you.
You can bow your heads with me. Father God, we thank you so much for letting us be a part of Ron Currin's life, for letting him be a part of ours. Father, we thank you for the deep swath that he cut in this world that touched so many lives. And I thank you for the good times and the great memories and the phraseology and everything else. Lord, most of all, I just thank you that you blessed us all with that time. I just pray for Ron's family. I pray for those who are truly close to him that just need your comfort. We pray for that peace that only you can give. And Lord, we just thank you for all this. We just pray that you'll help us to celebrate a life well lived. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We're concluded. Work our way up. We'll have some dinner. Thanks.